Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me, see me, probably hopefully as well, and hopefully a screen, a title slide that says talks about the subject or states the subject that we're going to be talking about this afternoon about back to basics with internal auditing within 9001. Hopefully that's the case. I'm sure I've got a technical team sitting back in the office there, so I'm sure they'll let me know if there's any issues, but hopefully that's all you can see. Just going to wait about another minute or so, just to wait for the last few stragglers who are stuck in traffic out there in the ether to join us, and then we'll kick off and start talking through the subject matter. So, just going to give it a few more seconds, and then we'll make a start. Okay. Yeah. If anyone or someone wants to give me a quick okay or yes that they can hear me and see me and everything, I appreciate that. Anyone out there? So I'm not talking to myself. Thank you very much. Excellent. Seen a few responses. That's great. Thanks to those who responded. Thank you. Okay, good. So yeah, we're going to make a start now because we're a couple of minutes past 2 o'clock, and obviously I realise it's Friday afternoon. So obviously, thanks to everyone who's joining us this afternoon for this session. It's a short webinar, just an little series of back to basics that we've been running over the last few months or so, and this seems to be a popular one, which is always nice to see, and it's I guess it's always of interest that there's such a fundamental subject has gained such a lot of interest amongst so many of you. So hopefully some of the things we're going to talk about, it will be fairly basic, but I guess that's the idea of it. So I think one of the things that can be problematic with these standards is a bit of jargon and things kind of overthought about the whole thing. So just going to run through some of the basic requirements, things to consider, and hopefully some of the things to kind of take forward out of this for everyone on the call here. So bit of housekeeping. I'm not going to spend too much time on these first few slides because this is really just about how wonderful and great NQA are, which obviously I'm sure you all know, but do feel that you'll get copies of these slides and a copy of this recording. So again, please feel free to absorb this in your own time. Just a bit of preamble really about NQA, who we are and what we do and where we do it. Okay. So just a tiny little bit about me and kind of what we're going to be doing over the next 45 minutes or so, half hour, 45 minutes. Yeah, like I say, 3/4 of an hour duration, give or take. At the end of that, you should see on your screens, you'll see a little question box within your little control panel there. In that section, please feel free to type questions as you go along, but again, save them for the end if you would like, and I will stay on at the end and answer as many of those to the group. What we will do, if there's any kind of trends in questions about things that are of a particular interest to a number of people, we'll answer those in one go out to in form of a blog or something like that. Or if there's enough interest and traction, then we'll put that into a separate webinar subject and see how that goes. Okay, so yeah, I won't interact with you as we're going along because that would just take too much time, unfortunately. But obviously, please feel free to put in questions, and we'll answer those towards the end. And like I say, there is a recording of this webinar that will be issued out after the event. Okay. So yeah, a tiny bit about me. The position I hold at NQA is the Principal Assessor for Quality Management Systems. Won't go through my whole life story, but 21 years now in industry. Been with NQA for the last 5 years, coming up 5 years now. Previously training manager, now looking after the assessment side of things from a quality side of things. So yeah, and part of that is obviously delivering these webinars and talking about things that interest us all. Okay, so tiny bit about me. Some of the things that we're going to be discussing is really obviously about internal auditing, but fundamentally what an internal audit is, the objectives of an internal audit, what we're trying to achieve with the whole thing, ideas around the program versus planning, and ultimately the outputs and the intended outcomes and the whole reason for doing an internal audit. Okay, so a few kind of headline and basic things there, but I'm going to really try and keep this kind of quite simple, quite straightforward. And I think with so many things with these ISO management system standards, it's so easy to overthink the whole thing and kind of overcomplicate it and get absorbed too much in the in the words and detract from what it is you're trying to achieve and the spirit of the whole thing. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So hopefully that's what you're expecting with any luck. Okay. So obviously there's a question mark here, but don't feel obliged to answer it unless you want to answer it to yourself. Okay, so what is an audit then? So fundamentally, like the dictionary definition, as you can see there, is a systematic, independent, a documented process for obtaining objective evidence and evaluating that evidence objectively to determine the extent to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. So yeah, lots of kind of ISO words there, and so not necessarily particularly kind of clean language, a bit clumsy if you like, but some of the things, the key things to consider there, this idea of systematic, okay? So the idea is that it's a programmed and planned process that, you know, that takes place regularly and in a structured manner, okay, that it's under control. Independent, certainly, so that that the person undertaking the audits is impartial and objective to the whole thing. A fundamental kind of, certainly from a certification perspective, it's a fundamental part of requirement of ours that auditors are impartial and objective. So you're not kind of any bias towards the whole thing. So a really important thing to consider when you're structuring and setting out the audits, that they're an independent process, so that people are unbiased towards the whole thing. And it spoke about documentation or documented process. Doesn't mean that you need to have a documented procedure. Of course, obviously you can, but the idea is that you have documentation in whatever form you feel necessary to demonstrate that internal audit function is happening, that it's effective, that your program, your scheduling, your planning, you're executing audits and reporting on findings and acting on findings. So the idea is that when the standard talks about something being documented, it's just to show that process is happening and it's happening effectively. So don't feel like you need to document a procedure unless, of course, you have, or you feel you need to, or you want to, and you feel comfortable, and that's adding value to you as a business. Okay. So that definition that we spoke about there talks about audit criteria. Can be something that throws a few people, as a course of doing an audit. But fundamentally, the audit criteria is what you're auditing against. Okay, so that can be, obviously, is your management system. That is a set of compliance obligations, set of requirements, customer requirements, procedural requirements, legislative compliance, whatever it may be. And some examples there. It gives examples of policies, objectives, your own procedures and processes, standards, and so on and so forth, things I've already mentioned. So the dictionary definition, if you like, if you want to call it that, is sets of policies, procedures, or requirements used as a reference against which objective evidence is compared. So that's kind of your criteria, the requirements essentially. So whatever it is you're auditing against, whatever it is you're asking questions against, or setting things, comparing your evidence against, that's your criteria. Okay. So that can be obviously 9001, 14001, any ISO standard, or any other things there, just as examples. Okay. But fundamentally, the key thing, set of criteria that you're looking against, is your own management system. Okay. So that's what you're auditing against, looking for evidence against. Okay. So then, in terms of objectives, then, i.e., why you do an internal audit? Why on earth do we do such things? I mean, obviously, yes, obviously, you want to please the third-party auditor. Yes, and they're a fundamental and black and white requirement of the standard. Yes, that's a given. We all know that. But where's the value in them? And I think that can get sometimes lost, and time after time you just get given a set of repetitive audits that's got little or no information on, but we've completed an internal audit, good enough, we've met the standard, and okay. Well, I mean, that's not okay. That's a way of looking at it, but I think one of the fundamental things to be considering here is some of the whys and the benefits, and that can be used to some of the things I've put on your screen there around identifying risks, so uncertainties within management system, things that can trip you up and holes you can fall down when it comes to your management system operating and functioning effectively. So looking at how things can go wrong. Okay. Identifying opportunities, absolutely. Certainly improvements. Okay. Any inefficiencies within your operations or the way things are working. They can be used to spread the word, to communicate information. It's auditing is not this, I think, it's still to this day, for the 20+ years I've been doing this, it's still got this kind of stigma. As soon as people hear the word audit, it's got this kind of negative kind of connotation to it. And it's certainly, I really try and impress upon clients when I'm auditing is that it's really not about that. It's about adding value, understanding the process, looking at where things can be improved upon, and yes, obviously, I suppose by definition, it finding something negative is thought to be is not necessarily the most encouraging thing in the world, but ultimately it's how you sell that finding, and it's not about nitpicking and looking for crossed T's and dotted I's. It's about looking at the process as a whole, how the whole thing works, and how things always all come together to make your system effective. Okay, so certainly add value, supporting engagement. You can get more people involved in the process. Don't feel like it needs to be a standalone auditor out there fighting the world and fighting the company. Get people involved, build an audit team, get the whole thing get people looking at each other's work and understanding the business and how they can input and interact with that and support it. Okay. But obviously, yes, fundamentally, the standard says ISO 9001 certainly, along with many others, require that you carry out, schedule, program, and execute internal audits. And I suppose the question is, why would you do internally? Why would you not? Okay, it's a fundamental and really kind of useful tool to have in your within your management system, to look at it, challenge it, improve it, get it moving forward and make it work for you to add value. There's nothing worse than a management system that sits in the corner, gets dragged out, and it gets dusted off for the auditor once a year. It's awful. I'm sure you'd agree. Okay. So fundamentally then, yeah, so the objectives are internal. What are you trying to achieve? The standard talks about quality objectives and management system objectives, but the internal audit process has its own objectives associated with it. And fundamentally, there's kind of three main parts to that, okay? And that is to ensure that your management system is conforming with in compliance with your planned arrangements, okay? So that is to say, the planned arrangements being your management system and your policies and your procedures and what you're trying to achieve, okay? Your methods of working and systems of work and so on, okay? Secondly, it's looking for conformance with the standard, whatever that standard may be. So that's the second part of it. So it's obviously those two do go hand in hand, but obviously you're looking to make sure that you're meeting with the standard as it is set. Okay. And thirdly, and probably most importantly here, it's a word that we use an awful lot in the certification industry, is the effectiveness of the system. To challenge the effective. How effective is this achieving our intended results? What we're trying to achieve, our objectives, our policies. Are our customers happy? Are we compliant? Are we improving? That's really kind of what you're trying to achieve with this whole audit process or assessment process, whatever you'd like to call it. Internal audit is probably the most common term. Okay. So yeah, the most important thing is yes, obviously they do need to be shown to an external auditor, but obviously that really isn't the fundamental reason for doing it. Okay, so really do make sure that you ensure that you schedule, you program, you plan, execute, and act and report accordingly to get value for your organisation. Okay, it's really build your system up and your audits to make sure they're they're the right size and shape for you, that they're not just going through the motions, and they're that they're actually adding value. That's the most important thing. Look for effectiveness and value added. It's really important to process. Okay. So yeah, when we looked at the definition of an audit, it spoke in there about objective evidence. Okay, now again, obviously it can be one of those things that sometimes throws people, but fundamentally, again, coming back to our definitions, if you like, objective evidence is data. And it mentions there generally consistent of records, statements of fact, or other information that supports the existence or verity of something. Okay, so the idea is you're looking for evidence in that form, okay, to support fulfillment of the audit criteria. So be that we've touched on compliance policies, procedures, and so on. You look for evidence to show that is happening, that that's functioning, that it's understood, that it's being implemented, and that things are working as they should. Okay. Now, obviously, for the most part, that objective evidence takes the form of a records or documented information, as we call it nowadays. So that can be obviously physically hard copy, it can be soft copy, it can be in the form of kind of EQMs and kind of all kind of management system. There's all kinds of softwares and things that can customer relationship management tools and so on, software and so on, that basically conform the records to something. So don't feel like you've got to I know when I first started auditing 20 years ago, records consisted essentially of big A4 folders of information that were presented to the auditors, and that was the evidence that you're looking for. But obviously, as time has gone by and technology has progressed, objective evidence can take many forms. It's not just those hard copies. It can be obviously soft copy, observed activity, people complying with things. Obviously, when you're doing maybe an environmental audit or health and safety, you'll be looking at things objectively in terms of observation. And also as well through conversation and interview as well. So discussion with the people performing the task. So you're evidencing that they understand what they should be doing and what to do next and what information comes to them and so on. That's the evidence that you're looking for to show that the process is there, exists, that it's understood, that it's being implemented and it's effective. Okay, so that's the evidence that you're looking for. Okay, and like it says there, can be attained through review of documentation and records, observation, interview, and following audit trail. So the idea is that when you undertake an audit, you won't necessarily look at things in isolation, you join them together. So you look at how your process and your business works from beginning to end, from a customer taking an interest in something that you do and wanting something, right through to that being delivered and indeed past that. So you look at that whole process and all the interrelated steps. okay? And the evidence to support that's happening is the objective evidence you're looking for, and hopefully you'll obtain. Okay, so there we go. So yeah, obviously don't remember the ways of doing this. Obviously observation, asking questions, questioning obviously is a fundamental part of internal auditing, listening to those answers and getting extracting the evidence as you need to, okay? So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time running through clause 9.2. Don't want to get too clausey on this whole process, but I think it was worthwhile just underline, where some of this information that I'm talking about today is coming from and the reasons the whole thing's coming about. Okay, so this is the clause of the standard. I'm sure many of you know this, but really just to kind of underline the requirements so that we all know where we're going. Okay, so the organisation, you good selves, shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the quality management system does a couple of things. Okay, conforms to the organisation's own requirements, so that is your management system, so that is your procedures, your policies, your forms, your documents, your everything that goes with it. Okay, and also the requirements of the standard, and that it's effectively implemented and maintained. Really kind of, remember those kind of 2-stroke 3 things that are embedded in there. So don't let kind of, the fact that, you've got to do them as a, as a requirement detract from what you're trying to achieve with this idea of an internal audit process, okay, and what you're trying to understand within your management system, okay. Now, a few words here on this next slide. So forgive this because a few words, but obviously I won't read them all out word for word. But again, this is embedded in the clause. Okay, so we'll go into a little bit more detail on some of this. So first headline kind of requirement there is about the organisation planning, establishing, implement and maintain an audit program to consider when you're undertaking your schedule up and setting up your internal audits, okay? And we'll go into the detail on audit program just in a short while, okay? So you basically got to set up a program or a schedule on something that says what you're going to be looking at, who's going to be looking at it, and so on, and when, and so on and so forth. So set the scene. Different from a plan, which we'll come on to in a short while, okay? So defining the audit criteria and scope for each audit. So criteria we've spoken about, okay? So that's what you're going to be auditing against, okay? And the scope for each audit. So essentially the scope, for those of you that aren't familiar with, again, can throw some people sometimes. That's fundamentally going back to basics, okay, as we are. That's looking at what you're going to be auditing during that particular audit, okay? So the scope of the audit. So what are we going to be looking at here, okay? Is it purchasing? Is it calibration? Is it the process as a whole? Is it, is it, are we going to go to a site, a temporary site, and look at what they're doing there? And is it installation? Whatever it may be, what are we going to be looking at? Okay, that's the scope. So what's going to be covered? Okay. Selecting auditors to ensure objectivity, which we touched upon. Objectivity and impartiality, very important. Okay. Ensuring that results of the audits are reported to relevant management. Again, sometimes gets missed, okay? There's part of the management review process that asks that you talk about the results of management reviews. But obviously, depends where you sit in the process and the organisation, making sure these reports don't get, and findings don't get just pushed away and hidden in a file somewhere. It's important that anything relevant, and it mentions there relevant management, but ultimately it's any interested party really. The standard talks about interested parties, and certainly the results of internal audits can, and indeed probably do, affect anyone who's involved in that process. So the results of them do need to be communicated out, okay? Take appropriate correction and corrective actions. We'll come on to that in a little while as well. And lastly, but not leastly, fundamental, retaining that documented information as evidence that the program that you set at the beginning there is being implemented. So we said we're going to be doing this. For those that you're familiar with, like plan, do, check, and act. Okay, this is what we want to do. We're going to execute it. Here's the evidence to show that we're doing it. Okay, and that can be in the form of obviously audit reports, non-conformance reports, associated corrective actions, all the bits and pieces that go with it, the planning, the scheduling. It's that kind of critical mass of information, evidence that shows that you're executing an internal audit process fully and effectively. Okay. So that's kind of the clause as it sits. Okay, so nothing that I've made up there. That's entirely at the standard. But just worth kind of touching upon those kind of key points because they do, it's quite straightforward and basic stuff that they're looking for there. Okay. So I mentioned just a short while ago, and also it's a requirement of the standard that this idea is you set up this idea of a program. Okay, an audit program. Okay. Now, easy to kind of overthink and kind of under execute and with this kind of thing when it looks at a program. So the idea is that there's some key things that you want to be looking at when you're setting up your internal audit program. Okay, so straight off the bat you want to be looking at frequency. Okay, now Absolutely nothing wrong with undertaking internal audits annually, once a year, the day before the external audit, okay, which is, it happens, which is nothing wrong with that. If that works for you, then that's absolutely fine. But obviously, one depends upon largely the size and shape of your management system and what you're trying to cover, the scope of the audit, because to try and do that all in one go, maybe once a year, can be pretty hard going. Depends upon, the size and shape of your business and the system. Nothing wrong with extending audits over, over a longer period of time. Typically they're kind of programmed and scheduled over the period of a year. That's the typical kind of default. But there's nothing wrong with setting out things, looking at the risk of the processes, and kind of maybe making them more frequent or less frequent based upon how you see things. Okay. So yeah, standard doesn't prescribe when you should do them. It just says you should do them. Okay. It also asks as part of your program that you consider the methods. Okay, so traditionally that would have been physically going, sit next to the person at their desk and asking them questions, or looking at them performing the task, whatever it may be. Nowadays, obviously, as we're using now, we've got the benefit or the luxury, if you like, of different methods of auditing. So that includes not just physically being on site, but obviously whether or not you're going to employ ICT, so remote technology, a blended approach to the whole thing. You're allowed to do that, okay, as long as it can be seen to be an effective way of doing it, the same as with a third-party audit. Okay. Responsibilities, so who's doing what within the audit? If you've got there's just one of you within an organisation and it's all down to you, then well, bad luck, but that sometimes is just the way that it is. Other times there's going to be an audit team, okay, so the idea is that you'd allocate different parts of the audit to different people, who's going to be, planning, who's going to be executing, who's going to be reporting, and so on and so forth. So make sure those responsibilities are embedded within, your program and schedule as a whole, okay. Take into consideration the planning requirements. So yeah, who's going to be doing what and when, on what day and at what location, those physical logistics associated with an audit, okay, and how that reporting is going to be made, and what's going to happen with those reports. Remember earlier on we spoke about the results of audits being communicated out, okay. Always remember to take into consideration the importance of the process. So there's an argument that all of the processes within an organisation are important, and I'm sure that they are to some degree, but obviously you look at a kind of the risk associated with them as well. So maybe it's a bad example, but you look at something like purchasing. If it's a relatively low impact, within your organisation, if it's just simply around, the coffee and biscuits and tea within an organisation, okay, obviously very important, but arguably potentially not as important as the design function, or something actually kind of that's more customer or product or service facing. Okay, so remember when you're setting out kind of the planning and your program and your scheduling, look at how these whole things sit together, and don't, because fundamentally it may be that you don't give everything all the same amount of attention all the time. You're allowed to adjust things. Okay, standard doesn't say you've got to cover everything all in one go and allocate the same amount of time to it. The idea is that you structure your program, your planning, your schedule to suit what you do as an organization and the risk and complexity associated with it. Okay, your program, again, keep it up to date. It's not set in stone. It's something that is meant to be treated as, with your management system as a whole. It's a live and living thing. Okay, so as your organization changes in terms of growth, in terms of people, or the processes change, or there's a change to a product material or whatever it may be, or a new process entirely is introduced, yeah, adjust your program to suit that. Add more audits in, take things away, increase the frequency, whatever it may be. You're allowed to change it. Just obviously keep, like when you're at school, it's a phrase I use, make sure you show your workings. If you're going to change your program and readjust things, just be prepared to kind of give a bit of explanation on that as to why that's come about. Okay. And lastly, take into consideration the results of previous audits. Okay, so when you're setting out your schedule for the forthcoming period, look at what you've done previously. Okay, was there a particular area that was of concern, or is flagging up as as causing problems, or on the other side of the coin has been performed particularly well? Okay, maybe we want to divert a little bit of attention from that and give it to other areas. Okay, so yeah, make sure you look at how they performed previously, and make sure that's embedded within your future scheduling and programming. Okay, so a simple thing to kind of get wrong, if you like, an audit program, and but yeah, it's important that you do get it right. Okay. So like it says there, just a couple of other things to kind of touch on when it comes to your program. Look at the organizational objectives. What you're trying to achieve with the management system. look at relevant external and internal issues, interested parties, look at obviously information security and confidentiality, locations and logistics. So for example, if you're part of an organization that's got multiple offices, maybe even be geographically spread, okay, like over the country or even the world, when you're setting out your schedule, make sure it takes those things into consideration, okay. And also as well, don't forget anything that's outsourced, okay. It can be a common mistake that's made. Oh, that's outsourced, therefore we don't need to look at it as part of our process. Well, if it's covered by the management system and ultimately it's interacting with the customer and the product and the service, and you've got essentially, it may not be that you're carrying out the function yourselves, but if you've got control over it, i.e. it's going through your management system in terms of supplier control, you need to consider that as part of your internal audit process. So you wouldn't necessarily go and audit the supplier as such, although you can. You'd look at how your management system controls that and evaluates and monitors the performance of the outsourced process. Okay, so yeah, just a phrase I use is that you can't outsource your liability. Okay, certainly when it comes to quality management, or in any sense of the word. Okay, yeah, but keep those changes up to date, keep them monitored. When changes do happen to a schedule or a program or a plan, just make sure you've got that evidence. You don't need to keep a track of every single, chronological thing that happens, but just be prepared to kind of, show your workings, like when you're at school. Okay. So that was the program side of things. Obviously, the plan itself, okay, this is more about the individual audit. So the program looks at the bigger picture. So it looks at the standard and the scope of the audits and what you're going to be looking at and when in a bigger sense, the processes and how they're going to be broken down over the course of a period of time. The plan itself is what you're going to look at during a particular audit. Okay, so that could be over the course of maybe a couple of hours, could be over half a day, 2, 3 days, whatever it may be, whatever activity you're performing based upon your program, generate that plan. Okay, and some of the things to consider when you're planning things. Okay. Give some detail on what you wish to audit. So, the activities and documents and records. So give the auditee a chance, to kind of prepare, understand what you're going to be looking at, and then kind of it sets everyone up in a much stronger way. Okay. Detail who you're going to select for interview, so the people that you want to see, okay, where you're going to be and when, and obviously what times, and if you can just, again, nothing set in stone on this, is entirely up to you how and when you do things in terms of timings and so on. And also as well, consider what methods you're going to use to obtain the evidence. So we've touched on whether or not that's going to be you're physically going to sit down and have a conversation with them, whether you're going to go to a temporary site and look at some activity going on there, or whatever it may be, or whether or not you're going to be just reviewing documents, and that can be part and parcel of what you do, and whether that's going to be remotely or in person or whatever it may be. So the idea is that your audit plan then sets the scene. It works for you as the auditor, because obviously it gives some structure to what you're going to be doing, but also it's a value for the auditee as well, the person you're auditing, so they can actually kind of get their head around, okay, this person's coming to see me to ask you some questions. This is kind of where I'm going to be doing so well, and also it lets them know where to be and when, so they're not kind of wandering around everywhere, and make sure they're actually sat behind the desk ready to answer questions. Okay, so difference then between a program and a plan. So the program is that higher level, the area of functions and activities you're going to be looking at a given period of time over a defined period, whereas the plan is the devil in the detail. Okay, so little distinction there. So yeah, so other little points just to remember when it comes to the plan: agree on the dates, the logistics, obviously scope and objectives. Explain to people, none of this is a secret process. None of this is particularly special or kind of a particular kind of wonderful art that auditors have got. Be open and honest and say, look, this is why we're coming in. Explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you find then get their support and interaction, and you find it can be a more positive. Okay. Yeah, familiarize yourself with the processes. If it's something that you're not familiar with, it's in terms of, it's an area that you've worked in before or about. Sometimes if you're doing when you work organizing, auditing your own organization, you haven't done everything, so you need to understand what's going on and why. Okay. So yeah, prepare the team, prepare checklists if need be, if you find that's beneficial to you. We'll touch on that in a short while. But yeah, it's basically kind of getting yourself ready, basically. That really is kind of just preparation. Nothing more than that. Don't need to overthink it like so many things. Okay. So yeah, things to consider then, little illustration there, just about things to consider when you're actually preparing for your audit. Okay, so going around from the left-hand side there, bottom left-hand corner, look at the scope, so what it is you're going to be covering. looking at your management system, making sure you've got access to your procedures, the relevant forms, and make sure you've got a good knowledge of what you're auditing and the criteria against it, okay? Look at those previous audit results, look at any contractual requirements, factor in any external audit activity as well. You know, it may be that external audit has identified some areas of concern or whatever it may be. Okay, do we need to consider those as well and as part of our planning and execution? Okay. Consider the standard that you're auditing against, of course, and lastly but not least is certainly any regulatory or compliance obligations, because internal audit isn't just about looking at, you know, procedures and words, it's about looking at legislation, compliance, customer requirements and so on. So factor all that into your audit preparation and your planning process. That way you can get more out of it and challenge the process a bit more, okay? So execution then, a few things to consider. I mentioned then earlier on just about checklists. Not mandatory, okay? You know, I mean, I use a kind of form of checklist when I'm auditing. It's more really kind of an aide memoir that kind of gives a bit of structure. It's more really because, you know, over time, you know, you learn more, but sometimes by definition, you forget more as well. So with the best will in the world, you can't remember everything. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with, you know, creating checklists, questions you want to ask, things you want to talk about, just bullet points, whatever it may be, okay? And the benefit of those, you know, it argues there, professional approach gives a bit of structure, gives a bit of flow to the whole thing, okay? The aide memoir, which is something that I certainly do. I've got lots and lots of NQA notebooks here stacked up with notes over the years, but things that I've taken notes on just as it gives you a bit of confidence in what you're looking at, okay? Particularly when you're auditing a process from beginning to end. Because when you start out, you're seeing things, you're going along, you're collecting names, you're looking at, you know, pieces of equipment, you're looking at, you know, procured items. By the time you get to the end of the process and you come to those individual supporting processes, you want to go back and say, okay, yeah, this is what I looked at, this is how I wanted to, this are the questions I wanted to ask about, okay? So assisting that note takes, it gives a bit of structure to the whole thing, okay? And also as well, it gives a little bit of, it can support the evidence, you know, part of that objective evidence to show that your audit process is happening. This is the things you've looked at, these are the questions you've asked, this is the evidence that you've gathered that forms part of that massive information that's so important to show that you're effectively internal auditing, okay? So yeah, when you initiate the audit then, if you're fortunate enough to have a team of internal auditors internally, fantastic. Obviously decide who's going to be leading and kind of heading the whole thing up if that's the case. If it's just yourself, then obviously, you know, you're in charge of your own destiny, so you work away with that, okay? Make sure you have that initial contact. You know, it may just be a case of, oh, call over to your colleague in the next office, oh, I'm doing an internal audit tomorrow. Okay, fine. But obviously if it's a little bit more involved than that, you need to set up times, schedule invites and so on and so forth. So just have that sort of courtesy involved in the whole thing, okay? Set the scene, set the scope, let people know what you're going to be looking at, why, what you're trying to achieve, and what you're going to be auditing against. So really kind of just making people aware of what's going on, that front end initiation, okay? Get things set up and ready so you can execute things properly. Select the team if you need to, okay? And obviously if you are doing that, make sure that team is competent and aware of what they should be doing and that they know what they should be doing and reporting back to you as the lead, if you're lucky enough to have an audit team about you, okay? So a few things, again, a few little basic things when it comes to principles of auditing. Hopefully nothing particularly strange or startling or unusual for any of you here, but this is straight out of 19,011 when it comes to auditing. Obviously, yeah, integrity to the whole thing. We all want to maintain professionalism and integrity with this whole thing. Make things fair, and when you're presenting them, make sure you know you're really kind of keeping impartial when it comes to opinions. I realise internally that can be sometimes tough, obviously, because there can be various things going on within an organisation. But really, as an auditor, you're looking at things objectively, making sure the process. You're not looking at individuals. You're looking at the process and is that working? Okay. So exercise that due professional care. Keep things confidential, remain independent, absolutely, which is what we've touched on a few times now. Evidence-based approach, okay? It's evidence-based decision-making is kind of fundamental to what we do, okay? So when you're coming to a conclusion with regards to internal audits and the effectiveness of process, that needs to be based upon some evidence that you've seen or indeed haven't seen, okay? Or lack of evidence, okay? That can lead to the issues, okay? And that risk-based approach, okay, looking at kind of the risks associated with an internal audit, you know, the risks associated with not achieving the internal audit outcomes, and how, one of the biggest risks associated with internal audits potentially is kind of over planning, you know, trying to look at too much in one go. Okay, it can be quite easy. So yeah, we're going to look at all of that in an afternoon, and it can be quite risky, okay, because it detracts from the effectiveness of the audit. So yeah, try not to overplan. Do see it happening quite a bit. Okay. Yeah, so a little bit on the opening meeting then. So again, you don't, as an internal auditor, you don't necessarily need to have like a full-blown kind of formal sit-down opening meeting, but certainly as a courtesy, some things to consider when you're executing an opening meeting there. Just obviously communicate what you're going to be doing, introduce people, confirm the plan and where you're going to be meeting and the logistics and so on, okay? Confirm what you're auditing against, confidentiality, the nature of findings, so the non-conformities, observations, okay? Obviously invite questions and clarify the closing meeting. Just gives a bit of context to the whole thing, okay? Those of you who've been exposed to external audit should be well familiar with this, but there's no reason why, from an internal audit perspective, you can't perform a form of certainly kind of opening meeting as well. Okay. On the other side of the coin, okay, the closing. Okay, so when you come to that conclusion, again, depends upon the size and shape and and the nature of your organisation. You may kind of want to have a formal kind of sit down and get a group of people, management, leaders, the people you've got auditees and so on involved. And the idea is that the closing meeting, you just kind of communicate your findings back, obviously give the pleasantries, the thank yous and so on and so forth. And it's really just a case of making sure that people are aware of what's been found, what the next steps are, and what this kind of means for them as an individual and yourself as an organisation. Okay. One of the things I'm always very careful of is, an opening meeting, there's absolutely no surprises, okay, that as you're going along, carrying out your internal audit, make sure people are aware of what's going on. If there's a finding coming up, this isn't a secret, secret process. None of this should be any surprises. Make sure the person understands what's been raised, why it's being raised, and what the next steps and what's expected of them. Okay, so the idea is that when you get to the closing meeting, there's not a bun fight and people arguing their way out of things. Okay, I've seen it happen. Okay. So a little illustration there just of some of the idea of the main kind of process itself. Okay, obviously as with most things, set out as a process, a beginning, a middle, and end. Okay, so the idea is that you've got that 6-stage approach. Okay, so setting the scene. Okay, introducing yourself, understand the whole audit process and what's going to be happening. Confirm the basics. So yeah, kind of understand. Give me a quick outline of what's going on here. What are we looking at? Okay, establish the process. When I'm auditing, I always say to people, certainly when I've been there for the first time, give me the outline of the beginning to end. Tell me what you do, and then we'll fill in the blanks as we're going along. Okay, give me the outline of the process, then talk to me about kind of what information comes to you, what you do with that information, and how you process and what's coming into you, how you're managing it, and what's leaving you essentially. And when I leave that person, I go on to the next step, pick up from what their output is. Okay, so establish that process, and of course you're searching for evidence. Okay. Check back to make sure what you're being told is true. Okay, it's you're not there to challenge people or trip people up, certainly, but obviously you want to make sure that what you're being told is accurate and consistent. That's the whole idea of the process being effective. Okay, and ultimately then that can lead into a closeout process once you've established your findings and if there's any actions required, which we'll talk about in a short while. Okay. So as with any audit, obviously, it depends upon the size and shape of what you're looking at, but I would argue that it's very, very difficult to look at something in its absolute entirety in in a relatively short space of time that you're carrying out an internal audit. Okay, so by definition, internal audits are a sampling process. Okay, so you're only going to have a look at an illustrative sample of what's going on, but obviously on that you need to establish as an auditor what is a fair and representative sample. Okay, if there's 1,000 things going on, you might want to look at a reasonable number of them to give yourself some confidence that things are happening. If there's only 2 things happening, well, you could probably look at both 2. It depends upon the complexity of it. It might be 1,000 very, very simple things, but 2 very, very complex things. So again, you might need to adjust your sampling as you're going along. Okay, so look at the risk, sample. The idea is that you sample to the degree you don't sample until you find something wrong. you basically sample so to give yourself enough confidence that the process is working, things are understood, and the management system is effective. Okay, so look at that, and don't be afraid to kind of go back in time a little bit. Look back, and you don't want to look too far back in time. It don't be years and years, but obviously if you suspect something's been trending for a while, there's nothing wrong with kind of going back and validating a few samples just to give yourself confidence that it was either an isolated issue or there's actually something fundamentally wrong here. Okay, so things to remember when sampling. Okay, and obviously when you're gathering evidence, take more than one sample, unless there only is one, of course. Okay, try and link those samples together. Okay, like I said earlier, so when you're working through the process of an organisation, in a very simple term, from inquiry through to review, through to planning, procurement, so on and so forth, make sure those things kind of join together so that it shows that process is working. Okay. Don't let the auditee select all the samples. Obviously, as an auditor, you're at liberty to kind of choose which things you look at, obviously within reason. Okay. And like it says there, don't necessarily take someone's spoken word and someone explaining something can be a very good example, good method of gauging their understanding, but it doesn't necessarily validate that the actual process is working. So don't just take that. So okay, it's not that I don't believe you, but can you show me, kind of thing, please? Okay, and it's one of those kind of skills you get as an auditor, just to kind of make people, you're not challenging them, you're just understanding the process that they're operating. Okay. Questions then, obviously, yeah, fairly straightforward. Obviously, a big part of auditing is questioning and how you approach those questions. Okay, think about what you're going to ask and what you're trying to achieve with the question. Okay, it can be quite easy to kind of just sort of go off on a bit of a tangent or a garden path kind of question and go off subject, but try and keep them as concise as you can. Keep those hidden agendas at bay. Okay, speak clearly, just explain what you're trying to achieve. Okay, and make sure you clarify any points of misunderstanding. And make sure you give that person a chance to explain. Don't jump to conclusions. Sometimes a silence can, once you've asked a question, just be quiet for a while, let that person respond, and see how you go. But obviously, people respond to things differently. So one of your skills as an auditor is to make sure that people feel at ease and they understand what you're trying to achieve with this whole thing. Okay. I think most of us are well familiar with the ideas of question types in terms of open, closed, multiple, and leading. Yeah, obviously open questions are a good way, kind of how, why, what, where, and when, and so on, as opposed to the closed kind of yes, no answers. But obviously, it's not an exact science. It's not, no one's going to kind of go to prison for asking a closed question. But sometimes you do need to ask them, just as you need a yes, no answer. But be prepared to ask those open ones that get people, volunteering information, explain their process, demonstrating their understanding. Okay. So findings then. So you've done all that. You've understand what an internal audit is. You've set your program. You've planned it. You've executed. You've asked all the right questions, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, that will lead to some form of reporting process. Okay. Now, and usually as part of an internal audit or any audit, okay, there can be findings. Okay. So non-conformance, and then pretty straightforward, non-fulfillment of a requirement. Okay, so a procedure is not being followed, the box hasn't been ticked, whatever it may be, it's basically a requirement that you've set within your management system that is required by a contract or is required by a legislative or compliance obligation, whatever it may be, that's not being done. Okay, so there you are, that's non-fulfillment of a requirement. Pretty simple stuff. Okay, pretty sort of black and white in that sense of the word. Okay. So the requirement, like we've said previously, in an internal audit situation, is that specific criteria that you've been audited against. So be that your procedures, your manuals, the standard itself, the ISO standard that you're audited against, contractual obligation or legislation, whatever it may be. If something's not being met, something's not being completed in any way, shape or form, there's your non-conformance. Okay, simple as that. Okay. So reasons to raise a non-conformance then, okay, so the practice itself that you're observing doesn't apply with your management system. So, okay, you're not working in accordance with, okay. Could be the other way around, in that the system doesn't reflect the actual practice. So your system might be out of sync of, what's actually, things have progressed in terms of, the ways of working, but the system hasn't necessarily kept up with it, okay. Your practice and or your system doesn't reflect 9001, breach of a legal requirement, breaching various commitments, okay, within your management system, certainly within your policy, you'll have commitments towards certain things, certainly continuing improvement, but also depending on what you're looking at, pollution and injury and health and so on. So anything that you're not meeting, essentially, it's basically, it isn't happening, okay, it's not being met, we need to do something about it, okay. Fundamentally, not meeting those intended outcomes, that's where you're after, okay. And when you're going to raise a non-conformance, I think some of us remember from the school days, certainly I do GCSE chemistry around kind of the fire triangle. Okay, you can build a non-conformance around the non-conformity triangle. Okay, there needs to be a requirement. Okay, in the first instance, there needs to be a requirement, a criteria that's not being met. Okay, you need to state what that finding is. Okay, so there's the requirements. The finding is that that's not happening, and then the evidence to support that happening or not. Okay, so you take one of those out of the equation, you're usually left with a gap. If there's no evidence, well, where's it show there's a problem? If there's no finding itself, then well, what's the issue? If there's no requirement, obviously, what can you hang your hat on? Very important to remember when you're looking at and raising non-conformities. What do you hang your hat on? Show me where we should be doing that. Okay. The other side of the coin, obviously, opportunities for improvement or observations, as it doesn't really matter what you call them. Essentially, it's something that's not a non-conformance, but that may lead to help improvement. It may address a risk. It may kind of give you a bit of early warning when it comes to your management system, just in terms of improvement and managing it. Okay. So yeah, opportunity to refine or improve the system. Could potentially be a little bit of an early warning, like we say, with regards to developing into a non-conformity, but make sure that it's of a benefit to the system. It's not just down to opinion. This is down to something that you've seen you feel could work better and benefit what you're doing. Okay. So almost the final piece of the puzzle then, about over 45 minutes, which well, not a million miles away. So correction and corrective action then. We won't make it painful by asking people to define the definition, but does still get confusing to this day, and it's a fundamental part, a basic part of internal auditing, part of this whole back to basics side of things that we've been looking at. Okay, so if anyone's in any doubt at all, it's on your screens now. Okay, so that correction then is that action to eliminate the detected non-conformity. So that stops the bleeding, so to speak. Okay, so something's out of calibration, calibrate it. That's your correction. Okay, but fundamentally here, what's arguably more important is that corrective action. Okay, that action that you take as a business, as an organization, to eliminate the cause or causes of a non-conformity to prevent it from reoccurring. Okay. Little bit of semantics and subtle differences, but they are different things. They're obviously they're related, certainly, but obviously as part of your internal audit process, certainly your follow-up, you're going to be looking to make sure that these actions that have been taken and determined, that have they actually been implemented, have they been effective in stopping things reoccurring. That's what you're after. So evaluate that need to take action. Okay. Subtle differences, but relevant differences, I'm sure you'll agree. Okay. And the reason for that, when you look at 9001, okay, so when a non-conformity occurs, including any arising from any complaints, okay, so obviously we're looking at internal audits here, react to the non-conformity and as applicable, action to control it, deal with the consequences. So these are the things you must be doing, okay? And this is the crux of it here, evaluating the need for action to eliminate the cause of the non-conformity in order that it doesn't reoccur by reviewing the non-conformity, determining the causes, and determining if any similar non-conformities exist. So that's the other thing to remember as well, when you're internal auditing, don't look at things in isolation. Something flags up and someone comes back to you with a response. Don't just assume that's the only thing that's been found. Look at is there a trend here? Is there a fundamental process issue that we need to address? And can something be improved to make this more effective and efficient for all of us? Okay, so that's part of your role as an internal auditor, is to look at the responses to findings. Are they being built into how we're planning our system? Do we need to kind of do we need to set any objectives? Do we need to reevaluate our risks and so on and so forth? The whole idea is that the internal audit is that checking part of your plan, do, check, act process, but it's a really key driver into the acting part of that future planning. So how is our internal audit detected any issues? Do we need to act upon those? How are we going to improve our system? Okay, it's not just a checking process that sits in isolation. Good, lovely, we've done our internal audits, lovely, the external audits are happy. No, how does this actually help us? What are the outputs of this? How are we going to feed this back into our action and planning of our management system in terms of setting objectives, training people, refining our processes, determining opportunities, addressing our risks and so on. It's a really big fundamental part of what you're doing. Okay. So yeah, make sure you implement any action needed. Review the effectiveness of any corrective action, big part of what we mentioned there, okay? Update any risks and opportunities. And that last part of the puzzle there, that last part of this clause, make any changes to the management system if necessary, okay? So don't just see your internal audit, like I say, that standalone part. Look at it as part of your process, your management system process, okay? Get some value from it, really important, okay? So yeah, when you're kind of finishing off and closing out, which indeed we're heading towards now, so 5 more minutes, okay, follow up and close out, okay? So as an auditor, when you go back to that audit area again, either the next year or the next month or whatever your schedule kind of prescribes, okay, when you're closing things out, if there's been a non-conformance raised, make sure that you real that it doesn't just a finding doesn't sit in a report somewhere and they get forgotten about completely the next time. Make sure you go back to it and look, okay, we had this problem last time. Where are we with that? Follow it through, okay? And obviously, ultimately, you're looking for closeout because that's what you're looking for, shows that things have been working. But if not, you might need to escalate it. You might need to kind of take the next steps, okay? But ultimately, make sure that you excuse me, that you look at how the whole system's working together. Okay. Okay. So ultimately, then, things to consider then when it comes to internal auditing. Okay. Don't overplan. Like I say, it's easy to don't feel like you've got to cover everything in one go, because that means we've done a good job as an internal audit perspective. No, plan as suits you. Keep the program effective. Make sure you're looking at what you need to. Okay. Make sure you really do understand what an audit is for, okay, and what you're trying to achieve with the whole thing. Yes, it's about, obviously, because it's a requirement, but ultimately it's looking for improvements. It's looking at how your system can be more effective and efficient, so that none of us are wasting any time, most of all you as clients. Okay. Make sure you keep records and act on the results. Really important. Okay. Communicate results. Okay. Don't just keep them as part of a like internal audit record filed away. Get them out there, if they're appropriate, obviously, display them, communicate them out, say to people, look, this is what we've done. And that's the good things as well. Okay. It's not just about, negative audit findings. If there's good practice being observed, get that out there, let people know that things are going well and we're doing good. Okay. Encourage them. Okay. Get people involved, get an audit team going, sometimes you find people that are really, really keen and really want to get involved in audits. We're a bit sad like that. And but yeah, certainly you might get some good people out there that really want to get involved and are very, very good auditors. Okay. So don't feel like you're out there fighting things on your own. Okay. And certainly don't see auditing as a negative. It has got a stigma attached to it to this very day, but it's really not what it's about. Okay. It's about adding value, looking at how things can improve, and internal auditing really is fundamental to that. It's a really kind of basic part of a management system, and getting it set up right and working well is a good thing to do. I've seen some really, really good audit practices, and it really does add value when you get them working well. Okay. So I believe a little bit over time, a little bit 5 minutes over. So hopefully that was just about bearable for all of you. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, went back on a few basic things there. Obviously, try to understand some of the principles and ideas behind it. I hope that kind of helped. It may have been things that you already knew. It may have just triggered some new ways of thinking in some of you, or not at all. For those that are still awake. Obviously, now what I would do. This isn't a kind of a verbal question and answer, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave it running now. I'm going to look over and see if there's any questions come in. Okay, I'll respond to those as best I can. Like I say, if not, if you want to get off, then that's absolutely fine, of course, and you can just excuse yourselves and go about your business. And thank you for coming along. And I'll hang around until the last question's kind of been answered. But there is a recording of this that will be made available to you, along with a copy of the slides. So hopefully that you can recap if should you so desire. But yeah, thanks for coming along, everyone. I'll jump over the questions now and see what's coming, if anything at all. Let's have a look. This is either loads and loads or an absolute nightmare. So let's have a look. So let's see what we've got. Undock, here we go. Right, okay. I'll answer some of these out loud because sometimes it's easier. Correction, no problem. Okay, will the slides be made available? Yes. Any chance of this? Yes, that's fine. Recording, that's going to be. Can internal audit processes be spread over 3 years, external audit cycle, or do they need to be completed each year? Okay, so the answer to that question is, the quick and dirty answer is yes, internal audits can be spread over any period you like. Obviously, all I would say to that is be careful, because obviously what we look for is external perspective is that it's an effective audit process. Okay, so maybe looking at if you've got design in your process and you look at it once every 4 years, probably not good. Okay, but again, look at it from a risk perspective. Okay, look at it from the risk of, if I don't look at this relatively frequently, could something get missed? Could that expose us as an organization that we're not gonna, we're gonna do something that we shouldn't when it comes to a customer? Okay, so yeah, the standard doesn't require that you do everything every year, but obviously risk assess it essentially and look at what you can and can't do. Okay. If there's only one person, the quality manager, how do you show objectivity? Yes, a very good question. It comes up more often than not. I think if there's only one person, obviously you can only, I think in a previous version of the standard, it used to use the words auditors shall not audit their own work, but now they kind of changed it to try and ensure objectivity and impartiality. So at the very least, if it's just you and it really is just you in an organization, then obviously, you can only do what you can do. Okay. And obviously, but fundamentally, usually there is, if there's a quality manager, but there's usually someone else within an organisation. Obviously, unless you're a sole trader, obviously there's nothing much you can do about that. You've got the option, of course, of employing external consultants. But obviously, that can lead to the cost. But certainly, just do the very best you can in terms of getting someone even external to you as a business. I'm not saying a friend or a family, but just get someone else from another organisation. So, would you mind even or something like just to sort of, I'm not saying you have to do that, but just do the very best you can to kind of ensure that objectivity and impartiality of what you're doing. Okay, can be hard though. Can we have the PowerPoint? Yes, you can, by all means. It'll get sent out. Thanks very much. Thank you. Good stuff. Would we get confirmation of completed the training? I do believe I'll get someone to confirm that in the office, but I'm not entirely sure. We don't usually issue certificates of attendance out for webinars because usually there's quite a few people and it gets quite expensive. But it might be worth just emailing the office about that. Okay. In the past, we've worked with an external company to assist with internal auditing. Is this a preferred way forward? It's not necessarily preferred. If it's of benefit to you, i.e., in the form of a consultancy or whatever it may be, yes, there can certainly be value to that. It's not something that's mandated in the standard, but obviously, if it's of benefit to you and of a value, then absolutely, it can be a good way forward, because they are arguably impartial and they've obviously got exposure to various industries and sectors, so they certainly can add value to the process to you as an organisation. They can bring value in that sense. Okay. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's the preferred way forward, in terms of kind of a certification perspective, but is it a way forward? It certainly can be, and it can be a positive way forward for in a number of ways. Okay. What would you recommend for someone new to conducting internal audits? Well, I mean, there's a number of things you can do. You can you can go on formal courses, obviously that we at NQA run. You can attend courses and from a one-day internal auditor right up to like a 5-day full lead. You can ask to observe other auditors. If you've got other people who've been doing it a long time, you can shadow observe, that kind of thing. Certainly read the standard. Okay, that's a good place to start. And the standard's not necessarily as daunting as you think. Okay, get a copy, dissect it and see what you're actually asking for. If you're new to internal auditing, look through previous internal audits that have been completed, look through previous reports, get an idea of how people are writing and recording things. Okay, just get to know it really. Just look at the standard, look at your system, look at other audits, shadow, go on courses, whatever it may be, ask questions, come on webinars, whatever it may be. There's lots of things happening out there. Okay. What have I got here? Do NQA have an example audit template for 9001? We don't have it. Now, one of the things we have to be careful of as a certification body is that we don't offer solutions or kind of consultancy. We don't. The quick and dirty answer to that is we don't, unfortunately, Rachel. I do apologise. You can certainly obviously look through your if you've got one, external audit reports and look at the format that takes. But usually, how you report is entirely up to you. In terms of reporting, it's usually just a summary of what's happened, recording of any findings and the evidence to support it. Okay. Okay. What else have we got? Thank you for the webinar. Okay. Yes. Okay. What kind of trait and actions to make sure that auditees are not defensive and willing to share as truthfully as possible? Some are not willing to seem as incompetent, so they cover their mistake. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good point. It's I think one of the things, you just try and be, I guess it's a balance between kind of being personable and friendly, but obviously at the same time maintaining that impartiality. So I think really the thing that kind of helps me most when I'm conducting audits is that you just explain to people what you're doing, okay, kind of, and why you're doing it. You kind of try and be friendly. Obviously, yeah, talk about things, try and build that relationship. If you share a common interest, that's absolutely fine. Break down those barriers, but I think the most important thing is just communicate, get people to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're trying to achieve here. It's not to catch them out, it's understanding, how are things going, how can we look at this process and make it better. So yeah, just be as personable as, and try not to be kind of, I'm sure none of you are, but kind of, I've seen over the years kind of people being big and clever and trying to be a bit condescending and that kind of thing. It's really not none of you would do it, but it's not a nice way to be, and there's no need for it. You're doing your job, and it's just really just make sure people understand why you're doing it and what you're trying to achieve. That's what I would suggest. Okay. What type of qualifications does an internal auditor need? Well, I mean, like I mentioned just a short while, you can sit on formal courses like such as we run at NQA. That gives you, if you like, I dare say, a qualification in inverted commas. It gives you kind of, you know, proof that you've done something. Ultimately, you know, you can learn, but it's a bit like kind of chess internal auditing. Okay, you can understand the principles pretty straight off the bat, but it takes a good few years to kind of, you know, get them, you know, to a format where, you know, you're confident what you're talking about, you know, and the whole, and you get more confident in your skills and your knowledge and so on. So I think in terms of qualifications, yeah, absolutely nothing wrong. Look at the courses that we're offering that are on offer out there, and you know, and that can be a starting point. Failing that, the biggest qualification is ultimately experience and doing it. Okay, there's no substitution for, you know, actually going out there and doing internal audits. You know, kind of an understanding and reading the standard, learning about it, and going out there and executing an internal audit. So yeah, there you go. How often should dashboards be updated or reviewed for internal audits? I think that with regard, KPIs, okay, yeah. So, well, the answer to that really is whatever you feel is the standard 9001 is quite vague when it comes to, it's not very prescriptive. It asks a lot, but it's not very prescriptive in terms of detail. So with regards to reviewing KPIs and your own performance data, that really is not particularly helpful answer this, but it really is down to you and your organization to say, like, okay, this is what we want to know and when. Okay, this you know, some things are going to be more important than others. So really, Robin, it really is kind of down to you as an organisation to set your KPIs should you want to, or, you know, those performance measures. The standard talks about performance measurement, okay, and it pretty much says words to the effect of you as an organisation have got to determine what you're going to measure, when and how, and what you're going to do with the information. Nice and vague, but obviously bearing in mind that 9001 is intended to apply to many organisations across many different disciplines and sectors. So the answer to your question, I'm afraid, Robin, is I can't give you an answer because there is no answer. It's basically whether it's fit for purpose for you and works for you as an organisation. It's giving you the results and information that you need. Okay. This version of standard has been around for some time. Yes, it has. We're coming up pretty much knocking the door of 8 years now. It will be 8 years this year. Okay. I suspect that if there hadn't been a pandemic, amongst other things, we may have had some kind of interim review. I've not heard anything officially, but whispers in the industry suspect something, maybe kind of some interim review in the next kind of couple of years or so. When I say interim review, usually you find standards tend to go through like a big change, little change, big change, and so on. So the next one tentatively will be something a little bit more subtle than the last one, usually just based upon industry and feedback and so on and so forth. So don't expect anything too strange or startling in the next few years or so. But yeah, it probably will happen at some point. What's the minimum frequency for an internal audit for an SME? There is no minimum frequency. Okay, it's again, when I was speaking about the program earlier, it's up to you as an organization to look at, you know, how you set things up and build that kind of frequency based upon the risk and complexity of what you do. Okay, some things by their very nature will simply demand more attention than others. Okay, so when you're setting things up and you know, and scheduling and planning and so on, just set that up, okay, based upon, you know, your workload, your resources, you know, your activity and so on. Okay, but make sure, again, I know I don't sound like a broken record, but make sure that whatever you set up, it's set up for you, that it's adding value and it's giving you what you need. Okay, so unfortunately, there is no minimum frequency. Unfortunately, it's based upon your own kind of look and feel of your management system and what you do. Okay. If our internal audit finds a non-conformity with an area, can the external ISO auditor also give a non-conformity for the same finding? Well, the quick and dirty answer is yes. What I'd probably tend to be more looking at it, if I was doing an internal audit and a client already raised a finding, I'd probably be more interested in what they're doing to address that finding, okay, and the kind of their actions out of it. If it was just raised the day before, maybe a little bit early, but obviously if I was presented with a set of internal audits, they said we found, you know, findings here, findings there, I say that's no problem at all. But please can I see what you're doing about these, what you're intending to, what your actions are, and basically what your next steps have been as a result of this, okay? Not they're just sitting there, okay, these are audits, haha, you can't raise anything. No, I'd be interested to see what your kind of process is out of that. Okay, so there's no rules about that we can't raise them, but obviously I'll be more interested in about your process of, you know, what comes out of that, okay? Do you work with many clients that have used an NQA APP associate? Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah, there's a good number of them out there. It's yeah, there's obviously, yeah, there's good resources out there. So the answer to the question is yes. Okay. I think that's pretty much. I think that's pretty much it. I can't see any more. I'll give it another couple of minutes. Still a few people on the line. So obviously to those of you that are still with us, thanks for joining. Again, obviously I'll keep my eyes open for any more questions that come in. But failing that, it's class dismissed. Go and enjoy the weekends, and I hope to see you on another webinar soon. Oh, and by the way, we are doing a little series of this. The next one is on continuing improvement in a couple of weeks' time. So forgive me. Hopefully, if you're catching the recording, you hear that this time. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for your time, and wish you well. Take care. Bye bye.